Someone left a couple questions up here, and I think they can be. One of the questions was, why does it seem easy for a man when he breaks off a relationship to shut off his emotions than it is for a woman to? Such as one day he loves you, the next day he does not. What? Yeah. Yes, John. Well, I should say I did not read the question accurately. I put seen. The reason being is that the question that was written there, I changed it with one word because the question was here, why is it easy? And I said, why does it seem? Because one of the things that I want to say is that what we see on the outside is not what's going on in the inside. And just about any man here can say that. I really believe that. What it seems like is going on the outside is not what's going on in the inside. Often, our society pressures do not teach a man how to share the inside. Anger and hurt? Yeah, and no, there's... Yeah, I don't know if I quite know what she's talking about, but it's like... Okay, show me.
You're not
No,
angry.
I'm not angry, so leave me alone.
Okay.
You're the one who's angry, so just sit down. Good example.
You can't do it with a smile. You can ask.
No. That's called, when there's a smile on your face and you're like, what is that? What's that? Smirk. What it is there's an incongruency which is giving you two different messages. One saying, I'm not mad and I can't stand you. The thing is that seen, what I mean by seen, it's just, earlier we talked about part of the thing with the left and the right brain. And when I stated later that emotions are kind of messy. They're not neat and tied up. And that's often why I find for a man that it's easier to shut down than it is to open up. Now, this is not a blanket statement because I look out here and I see, out of the men that I know here, I know 75% of them have no problem opening up. It's hard. It's hard, but to be able to open up and even to bring forth the pain and the tears associated with that. Yet I often find that it's after a huge loss experience that many men get into contact with that. After a huge loss experience. And denial is a process that we use after a huge loss experience that attempts to keep hold of a reality that is crumbling. That's basically what denial does. So when it seems like someone is shutting down, they're attempting to keep hold of a reality that is crumbling. So it's easier just to say it's not going, or often what we do is, okay, we'll move on to another. Let's move on to another relationship. In divorce, after a man suffers a divorce, they're generally remarried within 11 months. And for a woman, it's about 27 months. Now that's the average. I'm just saying the average. And what we end up doing is often try to cover up the pain without dealing with it. So I like to use the word seen because I know for me, I certainly didn't cover the pain. Matter of fact, it was evident to all. I know a couple people here who have known me since 1986. And while, in one sense, I didn't cover it, I did not speak it often. When I left huge puddles of bloody emotions all over the place, yet I never spoke a one. That's my issue. The other part of the question had to deal with why is it so hard for men to face and resolve problems and conflicts in a relationship, and the only thing that I will say is because problems and conflicts often deal with emotions. Right. Now, if the women here would just be logical, we would have no problem. Yeah, amen. What? I'm not very emotional? Don't let anybody watch. I'm going to strangle you. No, just kidding. Yes. What happens when we're intellectual, logical, factual? Okay. What happens when we are in a logical, intellectual relationship with another? Yes. Because what does it become? No. It becomes a power play. No, I don't like that answer either. The only reason why I mention that is often... What's that? Oh, breathe. I find that often in relationships, in the background, there's something going on concerning power play. We do this with our relationship with God. God, you're in control now, I'm going to go do this. Okay? What's that? Out to lunch. God, I did for years. I mean, basically, I was sitting in a group once, and it was with a very good friend of mine. His name is Dr. Verl Bell. He's the head of Minerth Meyer on the inpatient. And I was sitting with him in a group over at a Wesleyan church, and I came into contact with something about my life. And I said, I realized that in my life, that I would come across a conflict or something huge in my life, and I would say, God, this is big, but not that big. But you're bigger than all that, and now I'm going to go out, I pray, now I'm going to go out and resolve this. And I said, all of a sudden I realized that while I was making my problems small, my God just big enough to resolve my problems, and then saying, okay, now I'm going to go do it. So I said, what ended up happening is I made myself bigger than God. And I remember Verl, I hated him for 2 minutes. What he said, isn't that interesting? Satan only wanted to be equal with God, but you want to be bigger than God. And you know what? He was right. But many of us are like that. We say, God, you're big enough. Now I got to fix this. Now I got to do everything I can. In relationships, we often say, now we just got to keep working. And I found that in leading recovery groups, I'll come through a recovery group. This last quarter we had a problem during one of the weeks. If there's, in a divorce recovery, we don't allow both spouses to be at the same recovery group. So that if they're divorced, we don't, and it's a spring session, one has to go to spring, one has to go to maybe summer session. So in order to make it a safe environment for everyone involved. Well, so that they're able to share. Now we have seen marriages restored, but in order to make it a safe environment. Then what ended up happening, there was that, and there was 2 other issues came up, and I remember saying, I need to confront these people. And I did. The main thing that I needed to do was to come to the conclusion that I needed to do something. Now, I wanted to do it that evening. What was interesting is I waited till the next week, and out of basically 4 problems, I only had to confront 1 because the other 3 resolved themselves. And far too often when we run into difficulties in relationships, we run into a power play. One person wanted to be heard and understood, and I'm not going to hear or understand you until you hear and understand me. We have in our marriage relationship, when one person feels like they're not being heard, we write on a piece of paper that say, I'm not feeling like I'm being heard. I'm being persecuted. You aren't hearing me. So then, rather than to maybe change the subject and go on we write it on a piece of paper, put it on a magnet on the refrigerator, which means that we will get to it sooner or later. Once I post that, I usually find for me, we end up talking about it before we even have to look at the refrigerator. The reason being is that it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to get my chance, so I don't have to fight for the chance. Often in relationships, we fight for that chance to be heard. I want to mention a couple things, because we're going to end as close to on time as we can. And that's 7 o'clock, right? And I'm buying dinner? No, I'm not. I wanted to state something that there are 5 levels upon which we relate, or 5 levels of intimacy. I'll give you the first 5. Try to leave some room in between them. One of the levels is, and I need to thank Susan Jessamy for sharing part of this with me, but as she will see as I've added to it, is there's basically 5 levels, and there's more, but 5 levels. There's of intimacy, of ways in which we relate or connected. 1 is the emotional level. Okay, just write down emotional level. 2 is psychological. What I mean by psychological is on a mental level, on a conceptual level. So we'll just say psychological. 3, am I going too fast? Is physical. We relate on a physical level. We build intimacy on a physical level. 4 is spiritual. and 5 is sexual. Notice the difference I'm making a difference between physical and sexual here. Basically, on the emotional level, you're being tuned in to each other's emotions. We allow others to see our emotions. We allow others to feel our emotions, and then we allow others to have their emotions. We allow them to hold our emotions. We allow ourselves to hold their emotions. And really, it reminds me of Jesus in the garden before His crucifixion. If I was Jesus, and I'm not, but if I was Jesus, I would have gone to the garden without James and John and Peter. I would have gone by myself in my prayer closet and cried by myself and shared my pain by myself. That's what I would do. Matter of fact, that's what I've done most of my life. Is when I've been hurt or wounded, is to be able to, hey, I've dealt with this by myself. I don't need to deal with it with people. Yet, when we go through a grief process, grief is a social process. Did you know that? Grief is worked out with people. Because often we grieve a person. And then God has given us a process by which we heal the spirit, and that process is called grief. Many people come to groups that I've run, and they've come and they said, well, I've grieved this. But when I come here, I walk in the door and I can't stop crying. I just as soon cry at home, but I don't cry at home anymore. I already did all that. And there's truth. You cry there, and then when you move on to another level, you come in, and then there's like letting people in. Like, I don't like that. Like, The emotional level is basically a connection on not only feeling, but allowing yourself and others to feel. On the psychological level, this includes the sharing of the experiences of beauty, going to like an art show or watching or going on a vacation, going to the Grand Canyon. There's a mental connection. It also, psychological talks about a closeness in ideas. Psychologically, you can be connected with someone who believes the same that you believe. Sharing in the acts of creativity, closeness in coping with problems and pain. We feel connected mentally. We share what we believe, what we doubt, what we want, what we do not want. I love Paul writing in the Romans in a chapter where he says, I do not want to do the things I want to do. That which I do not want to do, that is what I do. And as a pastor for years, I unknowingly was saying something to churches that I pastored. I used to call that the do-do chapter, concentrating on him saying, I do not do the things I want to do. And then all of a sudden, one day, somebody told me what I was saying from the pulpit when I talked about the do-do chapter. And it was quite an embarrassing time in my life. Yet, Paul is sharing not only his own ideals, but the ideals of others. And when I read that chapter, I'm going, yeah, that's me. There's a connection psychologically, mentally. There's an intimacy that begins with Paul, who's been dead for 2,000 years. There's also a physical connection, and this does not mean sexual. It can be a closeness in sharing common tasks. Often within the military service, you see this often. Sharing together a physical experience of whether it be war or of training. Relating in experiences of fun. That's all usually comes under physical. Between a man and a woman, there are a great difference in what physical means. In Mark chapter 1, there's a man who comes to Jesus, and he's a leper, and he says to Jesus, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And what's the first thing Jesus did? What's that? That's the second thing he did. Very good, very good. But see, that's it. The first thing he did was he touched him. The clean touching the unclean. There was a need for a physical touch, and I believe that physical touch brought much healing internally. I believe in toe touching. Has anybody here? Yeah, some people have been here that have been in some of my small groups. Is when somebody's really feeling strong emotions, as I say to them, and I think we've done this, as I say, can I just touch your foot with my foot? It's a non-sexual touching that brings connection. That's the physical part. I'd like to know what some of these comments are going on right now. Spirituality, a connection relating to the current concerns of God issues. And under God issues, there's a big thought of vulnerability and in the coping of problems and in pain. And there often seems to be, have you ever been connected with someone and a feeling, you might not even have a relationship that often with them, yet there seems to be part of that relationship that transcends this world? Now, there's not a connected, you might even talk to each other once every 5 years, but there's a spiritual relationship. And sexually is the sharing of the body. Now, I mention these because every relationship contains some aspects of these and are expressed. Some are expressed in different ways because some levels are not to be opened until the proper time. Earlier I said I firmly believe scripturally that the sexual relationship is reserved for marriage. Yet the sexuality is also expressed in relationship. Not through touching, but through acts of love, acts of intimacy. And each move is entered into slowly. Okay, we're going to get psychologically, and I'm going to tell you everything I believe and you're going to agree with it. Now we're intimate. No. Each relationship contains different aspects from each one of these levels. Physically, there might be very little. When we were talking earlier in the first part about hugging, is that when you ask someone who's been through a traumatic experience, you ask them if you can hug them, not only are you attempting to connect with them physically, but also emotionally and psychologically, mentally. And God does this with us. God is just not concerned about your spirit. God is concerned about your emotions, about your intellect. God does not want to save just your intellect, just your heart. He wants to save the whole portion of your being. And each portion of your being, in a sense, needs to be redeemed. Many of us, no, I better not talk about that. In bridging the gap of foundational truth is the fact that we need a relationship with God. This is often the focus as we go into relationships. And it can also be a part that short circuits our relationships on earth. What I mean by that is that, have you ever heard the phrase about a person so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good? I was recently in a small group where we were sharing, and I asked, and it wasn't at this church, but I asked someone who had been through a real traumatic experience. And I asked them, how are you doing today? And they said, God is good. And I said, are you feeling a lot of pain? They go, yeah, but God is in control. And you provide for me every day. Then I asked the question, how are you making it through each day? Just trust in the Lord with all my heart. And I lean on my own understanding. No, not on my own understanding. And the thing was, I heard these things, and I believed that they were true. Yet 2 weeks later, the person tried to commit suicide. Luckily, they did not. And the spiritual relationship with God was trying to replace the physical relationship with people. Can we be in a place of, people often ask me when I'm struggling, they say, how are you doing today? And I'll just sarcastically say, well, at least God's on the throne, because nothing else is. And I know the fact of who my Savior is. And the interesting thing is, my Savior knows who He is. And how can I build a relationship with God if I'm not willing to bring who I am to Him? And how can I build a relationship with others if I'm not willing to bring who I am to you? The relationship with God is paramount and foundational. Yet as we build a relationship with God, God says, where does God ask us to look? When we say, Lord, come into my life, does God say, everything's all right now? I have found in my life, God says, look in there. Look in here. I need to begin to build a relationship. I mumble. I need to begin to build a relationship with myself. I need to build a relationship with myself. It was only recently. I speak anywhere from 35 to 100 and some odd times a year. And it's only recently that I've been able to say, well, this is really weird, been able to say, I think I'm a pretty good speaker. Other people have said it. And all of a sudden, it was hard for me to get to the point of saying, this is who I am. This is who I am. And the relationship with ourselves is often the way in which we work out our relationships with others. Within each one of us is the key to developing healthy and godly relationships. Each of you is a manual about building a relationship with you. Each one of you has a manual within you. We have a manual here. No, it's here. A manufacturer's handbook on building a relationship with God. A manufacturer's handbook on building a relationship with you. And within each one of us, within me, I have a manual on how to build a relationship with me. So if you want to know how to build a relationship with me, do you ask Gene? Do you ask Alan? I ask Alan. I talk to Alan to build a relationship with him. So that part of the process of growing, of relationship building, is to know my yard. So that I know where to let you in. With relationship with others, in, again, Harley's book, His Need, Her Need, he talks about the concept of a love bank. I don't know how many of you have heard this. If you read the book, he talks about it all the way through. That basically in all of our relationships, there's a bank account that is going on. When I meet Tom, he opens up a bank account within me, and I open up a bank account within him. And I deposit in his heart love dollars, if you want to put that. Love points. And as our relationship slowly builds, the level in the account begins to go up. Now, the more that I give to him and the less I receive from him, the less that'll be in this account in me. If I'm constantly giving to him and he's not giving to me, is that my bank account, or the bank account inside of me that says Tom on it, will not grow very large. And matter of fact, if I'm constantly making withdrawals, or if he's constantly making withdrawals out of inside of me and not making deposits, not giving part of himself to me, then what ends up happening is we might run into a deficit. And this, when I've met people who have gotten into a marital affair, not a single one of them have ever said, I'm going to get married so that I can have a marital affair and then maybe get a divorce. I've never heard anyone ever say that. I've never heard. As a matter of fact, most people who become involved in a relationship outside of marriage or outside of a love relationship, what generally happens, it starts out as friendship. It's someone I can talk to. In other words, the account in the love bank inside of me, there was less withdrawals and more deposits. So that what ends up happening is, before you know it, is the account in maybe Sally's bank is higher than the account from the person's wife, and all of a sudden they make a step into a marital or love relationship affair. And that's sad. We need to be knowledgeable. We need to know about these deposits and withdrawals. The reason, when I work with small group leaders, this is one thing that I tell them. I'm doing a training seminar for the Evangelical Free Church in Naperville next Saturday. And one of the things that we need to realize is that when someone is hurting, deposits come in real quick for them. That's why in divorce recovery, when we do them, we have a no dating rule. That if you come to divorce recovery, you cannot date anybody from that group. Because as you're sharing deep, intimate things, it seems like the account comes up real quick. But it's based upon something else. Intensity in a relationship is often directly connected to sensitivity. The more you feel a person is sensitive, the more intense things seem to get, don't they? And so often when somebody is listening and hearing, is that it's easy to mistake certain things. In our society, this is a controversial statement I'm going to make, but in our society, for women, they have often been put in a role. We talked about the 5 needs of women: affection, support, security. That they have often, in our society, been taught that in order to receive those things, they need to exchange sexuality for it. And I guess, in one sense, I say to women today, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that has existed. Yet often when we get into a relationship, it's easy to slip into that. To say, this person is meeting some of my needs, therefore I need to give something back. Doesn't mean sexually, but it means about a reciprocal relationship, like we have with God. You think God's in heaven saying, come on now, come on, it's your turn. I called you last, she said. God saying, I called you last. And then, that's good, I like that. We'll have to keep that one in the tape. Keep that in the seminar. Relationships, especially from a Christian point of view, we often say, if I just hold out, if I just hold out, it will be. That's often the difference between allowing a relationship to be what it is and what we hope it will be. A couple weeks back on the show, what was it, 2020? They had a psychologist on who shared some things. And I just bring it in because he was very true. He's just a strict research psychologist. He doesn't make any interpretations, doesn't try to tell people how to help relationships, but he can predict within a 90% tile on whether a relationship is going to last or not. 90% of the time, he's correct. And he says he has 3 determiners on whether a relationship would last. One is the communication level, how they communicate. Not how intensely, but how they communicate. Number 2, the way in which they go about resolving conflict. And number 3. Now he just taped people arguing. He taped people going through tasks, trying to build pyramids and things, and just looking at the way they resolve conflict. And when he talked about the valuing, and he talked about what are some of the things that detract from this, he says, he watched for contempt. Contempt, as he said, the woman would be trying to do something, or the woman would be expressing something, the guy just kind of rolling his eyes. Oh, he's going off on that. Or else the woman listening to the man, I can barely see without my glasses. The man trying to express himself and the woman saying, oh, he's going off on one of these again. And that there's a body language that goes with that shows not connection but contempt. Secondly, withdrawal. High level withdrawal, the relationship won't last. High level of contempt, and contempt is connected with the ability to listen, the less likely the relationship will last. Thirdly was criticism. Criticism. The higher the criticism, the more it detracts from the relationship. And last, defensiveness. Do you see how valuing another can be easily undermined? They were again contempt, withdrawal, criticism, and defensiveness. After I've had a rough day and I come home and Diane will ask, well, how did today go? And I'll say, fine. Got kind of beat up today. And then maybe she'll say, oh, by the way, can you take your shoes off when you come into the house? And I might say, oh, don't start. Defensiveness. And it seems, I had a Bible college professor who read one day, he read that the first 5 minutes in the morning determine the way someone's day will go. So, he thought, his name was Bill Crew, well, I'm going to experiment on my wife Judy. So for next day he got up and he was extremely cranky and crabby. Short with her. And when he came home, she was cranky and crabby and short. So the next morning woke up and was real lovey-dovey. And he came home and she was real lovey-dovey. So for 3 days he was crabby and 3 days he was lovey-dovey. When Judy finally found out what he was doing, she almost killed him. Literally. And now he's working on his master's degree in counseling. I think he needs it. Yet in there was the valuing of another. How do you value another? You value with not only your words, and that's often for men what they think. We value, well, I told you yesterday I loved you. I have a goal of telling you 3 times a day that I love you. So I value you. So, a matter of fact, just to get this day over quick, 8 o'clock, I love you, I love you, I love you. Oh, stick it in my ear? Repent. No. And yet we get stuck in ways of doing things. Yet one of the greatest ways we connect with each other is from the outward aspect. An author once wrote that 58% of liking How can you tell that I like you? 58% is by the way I use this. By the body and the face. Yeah, I like you. Yeah, I really do. A whole bunch. 17% of liking is displayed through tone. And he said the actual words make up the rest. Think of the power. To be involved with somebody is to be involved completely. To value someone is not just bringing home the paycheck. It's not just cooking dinner. Yet, to be involved with someone and value means that sometimes there's time apart. By that is one of the ways that I can relax is my days can be very stressful, and sometimes I just like to lay on the couch and watch an old movie. That's a good way for me to relax. And my wife now respects that. So when I have a bad week, it's like watch 7 movies in a row. No. When I talked about contempt, withdrawal, criticism, and defensiveness, none of these characteristics are manifested by God towards us. None of them. Some people might say, well, God withdraws from us. No, God does not. There are 5 things God cannot do, and off the top of my head, I can only think of 2, but I have them written down somewhere, and I'll find them someday. One of the things God cannot do is He cannot look upon sin. That's what Scripture says. It also says God cannot deny Himself, meaning when He says He'll do something, He has to do it. He cannot lie. And if God cannot look upon sin, what happens when we're just kind of really messing up? We move. God doesn't. Often within relationships, that in order to keep them from being abusive, we need to move away for a little while. With conflict resolution, I'm trying to be conscious of time here. When conflict arises, conflict is a part of life. Yet many of us do not like conflict. I don't know anyone. I find primarily with men it's real difficult because in a business world there is conflict all the time. In life there's conflict all the time. And with not being connected with emotions often, it's difficult to be able to connect emotions and conflict and be able to let them go. Yet in conflict, we often don't, could I say, attack conflict in a healthy way. If you're in a conflict, don't play archaeologist. Don't play the archaeologist. Each one of us have dinosaur bones in our closets. Furthermore, it is not your job to discover them, to act as a therapist for someone in the other people's closets. You are free to share your bones if you want to, yet do not use them to beat each other or to keep yourself from moving on. I remember at one point in my life when I went to share with someone and I shared the dinosaur bones in my closet, and I remember getting really angry afterwards because I was sitting there going, okay, now it's your turn. Come on, now it's your turn. And then all of a sudden I realized I was moving into another area called, I tried to play psychologist. I'm trying to fix you. Don't you realize how good I am here? I'm trying to fix you. When my role in conflict resolution is not to be the psychologist. I need to allow people to think and feel for themselves. It is not appropriate to tell anyone that I know what you are thinking or feeling even before you say it. How many times have you heard someone, oh goodness, my wife's here, I better be quiet now. Now she's going to start listening to the other tapes. Diane, they know you by now. So, that's my wife sitting down there. Stand up, please. Okay. No, Wayne, sit down. Or the one that I like is when you say something and someone else says, you don't really mean that. You mean this. That one hit, Anna. You don't really mean that. You mean this. And let's say, just for instance, that they really don't mean that. They mean something else. If they're not willing to express it, then they need to be held responsible for what they do share. If they say, well, I'm not so sure that this is all right to do. Go ahead. I struggle with it. And then later they say, well, I told you I didn't want to do this. No, you told me that you had trouble with it, but you said. When we try to interpret, part of the problem in relationships, we're interpreting. What does Barbara mean now? And especially when we try to go cross-culturally, whether it's from a different ethnic or cross-culturally from man to woman or women to men, different cultures. I find that especially in a dating relationship, men are more action-oriented. Sports, let's go somewhere, do something. where women are more relationship oriented in the respect of, well, let's go to a game. Yeah, if we go to a baseball game and let's just talk. No, you don't talk while you're at a baseball game. You eat hot dogs. And I'm very good at that, by the way. That's why I don't go to baseball games anymore. Oh, there goes the pizza man. Oh, there goes the popcorn. Oh, there goes the brat. That's the way that I am. To allow, and I know this has been part of the focus, but to allow yourself to think and feel for yourself is often the hardest thing to do. And to allow others to think and feel for themselves. What I mean by that is you don't have to control their feelings. You don't have to be in charge of their feelings. You don't have to be in charge of their thoughts. You don't have to be the one to persuade them to think differently. What you need to be able to do is express what it is you are feeling and thinking. That's all God is asking you to do. God stated to the first disciples, be ye witnesses in Acts chapter 1. He said, you will be witnesses. He doesn't say you will save every person upon this earth and that is your goal. He said you will be witnesses. And I encourage you to be witnesses of who you are and who God is in you. Don't play the preacher. You know what I hate? And I'm a pastor. I hate it when someone says, we're Christians, so we're supposed to be able to resolve this. So I just dumped a whole bunch of guilt on you now. We're Christians. So therefore, we're just supposed to set these things aside. And we're supposed to resolve this. The whole book of 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians are written about this issue. Talking, yes, we are Christians, and there is divisiveness. And we need to deal with the divisiveness, not the fact that we're Christians. When we attempt to play preacher in our relationships, the only relationships that we're to be preacher in is the ones where I've been called to be a pastor to a person. Recently, I've been asked by some friends of Diane to perform a wedding. And they're close friends of Diane. I'm just getting to know them. And at our first session, we went out to eat. They went to ask me, and I had found out early in the week. I called her work, and they said, oh, you're the one that's going to marry them. And I go, I am? But they asked me, and then all of a sudden they started talking about their relationship. And all of a sudden, after 2 hours, we spent time working on their relationship. And one of the things that I've had to do is they wanted to have the counseling session, premarital, and then we'll go out to eat. Well, I can't do that because I need to be able to separate part of me. Part of me is a spiritual head on attempting them to build their relationship. After the wedding, we can be friends. We're friends now, but we can work on that other part of our relationship. For me, right now, I am the preacher in their relationship. In a love relationship, there is supposed to be a spiritual head. I believe that. And I believe that it is the man who's to be the spiritual head. Notice that key word I'm using? Spiritual head. And if the man does not assume it, then he is ripping himself off and the relationship off. Boy, now how are we going to talk about that one? In conflict resolution, discuss only one issue at a time. Make a list and deal with them only one issue at each setting, and make sure both are talking about the same issue. Make sure both are talking about the same issue. When Diane and I talk about a lot of things, out of an hour discussion, we seem to spend 30 minutes defining what we're saying. Wait a minute, are we talking about the same thing? One of our favorite phrases earlier was, wait a minute, I'm talking apples, you just went with an orange. Let's get back to apples. You must also verbally respond. You must not expect the discussion to happen. You must verbally respond to the other person. For your body is speaking books of what you are feeling. And resolution can never be achieved without words. Often in recovery groups, I'm very conscious of people's body language. And we often run into problems with this because people say, this means they're closed. No, it doesn't. Often it does. What this means, now, in this room on a Monday night, this often means it's really cold in here. Yes, like today. Someone else said earlier it's real hot in here. Yes, I think it's hot. I'm sweating. And the key to body language is, what does it mean to that person? What does it mean to that person? Does this mean they're relaxed and not listening? Well, after sitting here for 5 hours, what does this mean? Stretching. Yeah, stretching. And I was just thinking of something else. And when we look at the body is the one part we can orchestrate our words. We can work them out. And like Susan said earlier, we can work them out and say, I'm not angry. I'm not. Really, I'm not. And I really got to go right now. My foot is tapping up here, by the way. We can orchestrate our words, but it is our body that cannot often be orchestrated. To get them all going at once is not, that's why actors are actors, because they not only get the words going, they get the body going with it. Just a couple other things. Time and place in conflict resolution must be negotiable. To have a conflict with someone and to run up to them in the midst of a meeting at work and say, you dirty Ressa Fressa, see what you did? We have a conflict here. Let's resolve it right now. Whenever we attempt to say now is the time that we need to talk about this, we are moving into a power play. Now we can say some things like, well, we really do need to discuss this. When would be the best time? Know when to stop arguing. The goal is not persuasion, but resolution. And realize that resolution often comes after long cooling off periods. And you can disagree about facts, and you can disagree about opinions, but do not try to disagree about both at the same time. Opinions are opinions and should be allowed. We do not all see the world in the same ways. When discussing facts, make sure you have all of the facts and that they are accurate. Generalization is the enemy of resolution. God, when He speaks to us about our relationship with Himself, He does not say, well, you got some things to work on concerning your pride, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. Just in general, just work on your pride. God is very specific. And in relationships, we need to be specific. But please, I've said over and over and over and over and over and over again that much harm has been done in the name of Jesus Christ. The Crusades is a good example. And much harm has been done in the name of a preacher. And much harm has been done in the name of a therapist. Therapists will work with somebody and say, you need to stand up and you need to tell that person what you're feeling. So then they meet the person and they go, you're awful, I can't stand you, and I'm just doing what I was told, I'm standing up to you, so there. Then you go back to the counselor and say, see, I did it. I did really good. I would love for us to have a little counselor on our ear. A little fly on the wall. I never heard that phrase before. Little fly on the wall that can hear what's going on. And we do have that. It's called God. And in all of this, I want to state one big thing, is that you, if left to your own devices, will fail at everything we've talked about. But God is bigger than all that. God, hear the whole phrase before you react to it, is God does not affirm perfection. God desires perfection, but God knows we will never be perfect. God will always affirm progress. God will affirm progress. And please don't take my statement of you will fail. What I'm saying is that often earlier in our relationship I would say to Diane, I've sinned against you, and if left to my own devices, I will do it again. And this is what I'm trying to do so I don't repeat. And can I have your help? And with individuals, God has given us, for our individual relationships and our relationship with God, God has given us community. One of the reasons why you're here today is not just to hear things, to maybe grab a hope or a future, but also, I'm really hoping that in some of the talking back and forth, that you have also been able to connect with others to see you're not alone. And there is hope, and there is progress. And just you coming today is a commitment towards progress. And God will not abandon you, even though others, it might seem like. And wherever we go from here, all of our work, all of our labor, all of our learning will mean nothing if we do not apply what Jesus told the disciples. And that's to go. You need to do. You need to try. This time we've had together, it's been scary for me. I know it's been scary for you. I'm fighting back some tears right this minute. This has been a scary time. When people ask me, how come you think you can teach on relationships? The first thing that comes to my head, well, I goofed up a lot. But I am committed to it. I'm committed to building healthy, godly relationships. And I don't mean to sound arrogant, I am so proud of you for being here. It takes courage. And courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is going on in spite of it. And I'm proud of each and every one of you who have been able to be here today. For without you, any relationship is meaningless. What I mean by that is that we have built a relationship throughout this day. And I ask for forgiveness. So when you come up to me a month later and say, "Hi, Richard, remember me?" And I'm going, because all of you are looking at one. And I am looking at many. And I'd like to thank a couple people right this minute. I want to thank this church. I want to thank Phil Nelson and the elders of this church for allowing us to be able to do this here, for allowing us at times to experiment. I'd like to thank Darlita Holstein for coming this morning and to help out. Bobby Cavapple for helping out with the books. Wayne Keene, who's been working on sound. Susan Jessamy, who has been a fellow traveler with many. Glory Borgeson, one of our board members for SALS Ministries. And I'd like to thank you. It's not easy, is it? It's not easy. But God gave us the most precious thing He had in order for us to have relationship. And we have shared something special today, whether you want to admit it or not. And I encourage you, before you leave this place today, to give a blessing. I have this thing that I do at the end of most every seminar, and I call it the blessing, and I basically just did it. When you give a blessing, I often try to do 4 things. Some people call this saying goodbye. Whenever I use that word, some people get high anxiety, because a lot of us will see each other tomorrow. But when you've been through a seminar or a setting like this, it's important to not rip yourself off, to bring some kind of closure. I've had the privilege of sharing with all you how I feel about today and about you. And maybe with someone today you can do these things. By setting, I'm talking about be able to talk to someone, set up the setting. I remember in a support group once, a person wanted to tell this person how they felt about them, so they turned their chair around, faced the wall, and told them. The important thing was telling. That was the important thing. It seemed a little silly, but it was important. Number 2, how they have touched your life, or how the experience you have gone through has touched you. Thirdly, how this has changed you, or how you have seen it change another. And then finally, a hope or wish for a future. And my hope or wish for all of you is a little less struggle in relationships. I have often found that if I don't try as hard, it usually goes a little better. When we're trying to resolve or trying to build relationships, I love what Dave said earlier, or what you mentioned, Anna, is that, so if I do these things, this will happen. So then when somebody was saying earlier, when I go to someone, okay, I did just like the book said. It doesn't always work that way. My hope or wish that wouldn't be so hard, that you would also see the neat person that is sitting in your chair today. That you would be able to look beyond your faults, your weaknesses, for we have all been created with strengths and weaknesses, and God can use us in spite of our strengths. For it is in your weaknesses that you are also valuable to God and to me. Because in my weakness, you can be strong. Where I'm not spontaneous, Diane can be. Where Diane is not organized, I can be. And after a while, we change each other so that we don't become so extreme. I pray that you would be able to see the person sitting in that chair. And my last hope or wish, that you would never, ever, ever let go of God. Never. My sound man is going 2 minutes. With that, we have about 7 minutes before the end, but we are going to take up, I did mention earlier that we were going to take up an offering in the afternoon because of the fact there's people here who were not here this morning. If you feel desirous of giving again, fantastic. If you're unable to or don't want to, that's great too. Allow others the chance to respond. So an offering plate will be working from the back to the front, or they'll be working somehow. And again, remember that we do have books, and there's Help and Hope, the newsletter. And if you'd like to be on the mailing list for Help and Hope, there's sign-up sheets over there. There's also sheets over there for the next Real Relationship Seminar being held in Oak Park. There's also a brochure or a handout up there concerning our benefit dinner that's being held when, Glory? Benefit dinner. May 14th to Friday in May, and the cost is $13. There's things back there to look at that. I ask you to consider that. So why don't you go ahead and just come through with the offering. If you're making out a check, please make it out to SALS. And in a minute, I'd like to pray closing for the day. Is there any response or questions or comments from anyone? Pardon me? You're welcome. You're welcome. Any comments or questions? Please.